Welcome to the show. Cafecito and Tattoos. Politica, raw and uncensored. With your host, Machi and Brad.
Welcome to Cafecito and Tattoos. I am your host, Machi, along with my best man, Brad. And we couldn't be happier to have Melina with us today. She's a doctor, she's a professor, she's a badass, she's an activist, and she's someone that's making shit happen. And that's why you're on the show today. We're super excited. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be with you.
I wanted to have a candid conversation. You know, I was born in Miami, Florida. My parents are Cuban and Spanish. And I grew up I was here till about the age of 3, raised in Barcelona, Spain, came back when I was 15, 16. And since then, it's been pretty obvious that Black people have been not treated the right way, to say the least. And at what point are things going to change? Because the strategy that we have in place is not working. And someone like you that's truly in the front line, what shift has to happen in order for regulation to start changing?
Sure. So, one of the things is we have to remember that this nation is built upon the stolen land of indigenous people and the stolen labor and lives of African people. So what we see about the treatment of Black people at the very bottom of virtually every single social, political, and economic measure is by design. And so until we are willing to do the work, the masses are willing to do the work to upend unjust systems, we're going to continue to experience injustice, because injustice is really woven into the fabric of the nation.
I wanted to talk to you about a lot of things, but I just wanted to start with the name of Black Lives Matter, BLM. Mm-hmm. Now, for some people, it's too hard-hitting. You know, it's too much in your face. For me, from a marketing and sales strategy, I don't like it. I support it 100%, but let me tell you why I don't like it. You do have, obviously, the support of Black Americans, so you already have that audience. What the movement's missing is the other ethnicities and nationalities to actually get on the front line and represent and back you from the beginning. So from a sales component, I think it would have been called All Lives Matter, but let's focus on Black ones first. Right. Because again, we're selling to an audience. So if we want to grab the other side, we got to make them believe that they do matter, which they do, but we got to focus on another group right now that definitely has top priority. So how do you feel about that idea?
And just to add to that, how did the name evolve in the first place? Yeah,
so one, your proposed statement would make a horrible chant, right? You can't chant. But two, we're not selling. This Black Lives Matter is a rallying cry. Black Lives Matter is intentionally for Black people to remember and recall our own power. And it is a challenge to those who benefit from anti-Blackness and white supremacy to figure out for themselves, do they want to tether themselves to that system, or do they want to advocate for freedom for Black people and by extension, everybody else? So 7 years ago, or almost 8 years ago now, when Black Lives Matter emerged as a movement, right? We did have to have a lot of conversations about those who would prefer to say all lives. And I think we did a really good job in doing some political education over the course of the last 8 years. I think that last summer's kind of global uprisings and the willingness of corporations and governments and white folks to talk about Black Lives Matter, to say Black Lives Matter unabashedly, reminds us that that kind of deep political education works when you're willing to put in the effort. So we're not getting the same kind of questions that we got when we were formed in 2013, or as we emerged as a global movement in 2014 with pushing back. People don't push back when we say Black Lives Matter and then challenge it with an all lives. The only people who do that are really blatant white supremacists. Almost everybody now is willing to say Black Lives Matter. Where we are now is, how do we make Black Lives Matter? When you ask, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
When you ask, where did it come from? It came from in 2013, July 13th, 2013. And you'll remember this because you're in Florida.
Trayvon Martin.
That was the day that George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. And one of our co-founders, Alicia Garza, had penned a love letter to Black people. And she signed that love letter, Black Lives Matter. And then 2 days later, when those of us who were in the streets were gathered together, what it meant was a building of an enduring movement. And so we committed ourselves to building a movement, not a moment, a movement, not a moment. And so while we were organizing and in the streets and turning up in the name of Trayvon Martin, we also recognized that he was part of a long list of Black people whose lives had been stolen by the state. So Black Lives Matter was absolutely about Trayvon, but it was also about Oscar Grant and Sean Bell and Margaret Mitchell and all of those who had been stolen before Trayvon.
So, I've always had this thing. To me, there's no more loyal American than Black people, because no one has given more, no group has given more and been more loyal to the country. And it reminds me of Doc Rivers' tearful comments after the George Floyd murder, where he said, he was crying and he said, "We keep loving this country and it doesn't love us back." And so two things that really struck me that sort of illustrate what I'm talking about. I heard an interview of a Black soldier from World War II. And the guy said that the German interrogators, the Nazi interrogators, would bring him out every day. And they'd say to him, "Why are you loyal to this country?" And the Germans just couldn't get it, you know what I mean? So they'd bring him back the next day and go, "Well, what about the Jim Crow laws? Well, what about the segregation? And they would educate themselves about it and bring the guy back and go, "But why are you so loyal?" And it wasn't a matter of any strategic military usefulness. They just couldn't imagine it. And then, I was on a flight right after 9/11 with a South American client leaving the country, and they hadn't secured the cockpits yet. So flying was like, everyone was a bit scared, and the A320 was empty. And we had seats in first class, and the plan had been that he would sit next to me, we'd discuss the case. And he gets up and he goes to the back of the plane, and he's sitting with a group of about 12 Black people. So I went back there, I said, "What's the story? I mean, you got a seat in first class and the plane's empty and you're sitting next to these people. What's the story?" And he says, "The one thing I know for sure, these people aren't going to bring the plane down. I don't know about everyone else on the plane." And that's sort of, so that's my observation. And along those lines, you said something I read in your readings, in your writings, that I thought was very, rang true to me. And I thought I'd like you to expound upon it. It's that Black people being superhuman, what's asked of them and what they endure is superhuman. So you said, asking people to do is behave in a kind of superhuman ways, but we are superhuman. The fact that we exist proves we are superhuman people. No other people could have survived, thrived, and turned scraps into soul foods, created hip hop, practiced spirituality, raised our children, and done the things we've done. No other than African people. And I think that's accurate. That's absolutely accurate. And as a matter of fact, if you look at everything that comes out of the former Confederacy, it was invented by Black people. The the spices, the barbecue, the music, you name it, Black people invented it. So I'm just sort of, when I look objectively, I'm like, here's the most loyal people who have endured, in a sense, superhuman, had to be superhuman to endure, and they're not appreciated. And I don't know what to do about it, and I can't imagine what it's like to have to, I don't know how to endure that. But please tell me a little bit more about the superhuman, because I find that really interesting, and you're the only person I've ever found that said it.
I think that this Derek Chauvin trial is a hell of an illustration, right? So I've been spending a lot of time kind of sitting with the testimonies of the witnesses, especially the children. And the 17-year-old girl, Darnella Frazier, who was walking her 9-year-old cousin to the store to get snacks when George Floyd was murdered. You know, now we know it took 9 minutes and 29 seconds for Derek Chauvin to steal his life. And I'm the mother. I have a 17-year-old. I have a 17, 14, and 11, right? Are my kids' ages. So I have a little Black girl who sounds like Darnella, right? And I think about how my kids walk to the corner store and get snacks. And it should be one of the most joyful, carefree experiences. Every child, you know, gets excited about getting their hot Cheetos and sodas and whatever it is they're getting, right? Every child gets excited about that. Every teenager, this is a happy time. Every 9-year-old, this is a happy time. And they should be able to joyfully go to the store and get a bunch of unhealthy snacks and enjoy the day, right? But instead, Darnella and her 9-year-old cousin are met with Derek Chauvin's knee on the neck of George Floyd. And Darnella is superhuman in that she whipped out her cell phone and she recorded and didn't stop recording and made sure that that video went to the world. And that's what sparked an entire 10 months of outrage, right? And I think about how Darnella in her testimony talked about how she stayed up most nights for the last 10 months apologizing to George Floyd and saying she wished she had have intervened. She keeps saying, I'm sorry to him. And she wished she had have physically intervened.
She would have been shot.
And I think about the filming and the courage and the testimony and even the apology and the connection with the spirit of George Floyd and her questioning of herself, but then quickly recognizing, she said, it's not what I should have done, it's what he should have done, talking about Chauvin, right? And that is Black girls' superhumanity, right? I think about, I think his first name was Donald Williams, and him just calling Chauvin a bum over and over and over again, right? Because that's the power that he had. All he had was the power to say, what are you doing? This does not make you a man that you're putting your knee in the neck of this brother, right? And all of the people who were witnesses. That's what I mean by the superhumanity of Black people. And we shouldn't have to be superhuman. We should be able to, it's wrong that Darnella and her 9-year-old cousin had to witness that, Darnella kept talking about, as she watched, she kept thinking about her own father and her brothers and her friends, because they're all Black men. And she kept thinking about what this means for them. And they shouldn't have to, our children shouldn't have to be superhuman, but we do. Our people shouldn't have to be superhuman, but we are. And so that's what I meant by that, making soul food out of scraps, right? Making music without instruments, right? Making beauty out of nothingness, right? That's what Black people have been, had to do.
And it's not just unappreciated, but depreciated, and it's horrible, just horrible.
How do we change things around? Because, I'm Cuban and I get pissed off. I'm frustrated because nothing seems to change. What Mr. Floyd went through, we've seen it repeated over and over and over and over and over. And we feel that we're taking steps forward. And then we got new instilled voter suppression laws. So what can we do to literally make a change? And I think it has to come from other ethnicities. I really do. I think that, white people have to get in front of the line. I think other minorities have to really lead and say, you know what, we're going to represent you guys and we're going to fight your fight. And that's the least we can do. And that's what I don't think happens. You do have some white people, but when shit happens, everybody says a big quote, everybody's holding hands, everybody's supporting, and a week later, nothing happens. So what strategy can we put in place? And I have now a social media platform. I really want to expand on this, and I want you to give me a playbook as far as what do I personally have to do to make an impact for BLM?
Sure. So one, BLM is a Black-led, ally-supported organization. So for a lot of the non-Black folks who've become involved, we have to quickly remind folks that we are the best to chart our own course to freedom. So the question you just asked is really an important one, asking what you can do rather than saying, this is what I'm going to do, right? And then with regard to what you can do, it's three things. It's your voice. So amplifying what it is we're sharing, right? Talking both from your platform, but also within your social circle about when you just ask, why do we say Black Lives Matter? Making sure that people in your social circle understand why we say Black Lives Matter, right? Talking about why this George Floyd trial is so important and why we had to rise up over the course of the last summer, but also over the course of the last 8 years. So using your voice. Second is your body. And I know we're in a pandemic still. I know some people in some states don't think we're still in a pandemic, but we are still in a pandemic, right? And so what that means is showing up either in person or virtually for BLM work, right? So Black Lives Matter is doing work. When we are out in the streets, everybody counts, right? We need bodies on the line. One of the things that happened about a year into Black Lives Matter is White People for Black Lives formed. And one of the things that our white folks have been willing to do that has been really impactful and that we continue to use as an organizing strategy is one of my dear friends and sisters, Rosa Clemente, actually called for this. She said, we need white people to put their bodies in between us and the police. And so at Actions, what you'll see a lot of times is white folks serving as security and kind of a buffer between Black people, Black protesters, and the police. Because when we think about what happened, especially in Los Angeles over the course of the summer, we were shot by rubber bullets. We were beaten with batons. We were sprayed with pepper spray. Even children were, right? But when there's a white presence, there's less of that, right? So your bodies are important in terms of showing up, but also being willing to serve as a buffer sometimes, right? And then the last thing that we need is resources. And so what that means is absolutely writing a check, but also thinking about what else you can offer. So for instance, when we have our meetings, We don't have a headquarters, right? We need to, if you have control or, the ability to offer space for us to meet, we need that. We need, I'm grateful that a web company, a communications company, we're now launching into this effort to end police associations, right? We're saying that police associations, which call themselves unions, but are not unions, because I'm a union member. A union member is not just about, unions are not just about the salary and benefits of its own members, but also solidarity is central to union membership, right? And so when you think about police associations, they are fundamentally opposed to the interests of virtually every other working class person. So we're in this work to end police associations. And even as we go back to the idea of the Derek Chauvin trial, we need to remember that his defense is provided by the union, which he should no longer be a part of because he was fired, right? But you still have police associations who are protecting officers and former officers. And so we're in this push to end police associations. And as we talk about how we move things forward, we have to think about what it is we need. We need things like websites. So we're grateful that a communications company said, you know what, we see you doing this work to end police associations. Let's get together and we'll donate our expertise. We'll donate staff to help you build this website. So that's what we mean in terms of resources. So it's your voice, your body, and your resources are the three things that we need. And we want you to plug in officially with Black Lives Matter. So we're at blacklivesmatter.com. And if you have a local chapter, getting involved in the local chapter work is also important.
That's helpful. And those things I didn't know about. But, when you talk about police, there's a particular problem. And it's a problem for all citizens. This isn't something that, it's much worse for Black people. But I'm a middle-aged white guy in a wealthy neighborhood. I had a cop pull a gun on me in my own driveway.
Wow.
The guy thought I was brushing my cat, and I didn't have a shirt on, and the guy thought I had a gun. It's unbelievable. It's like my driveway, for God's sakes. I've had a lot of problems with police, and I've been I was a criminal defense lawyer, and so I know their handiwork. And to me, the first problem is the LEO Bill of Rights, Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. Let me just read some. Questioning a law enforcement officer should be conducted for a reasonable length of time. They don't give defendants that, potential defendants, preferably while the officer is on duty unless exigent circumstances. Law enforcement officers should take, long and short of it is the guy gets a lawyer, he gets time to create an alibi or create all sorts of explanations. He doesn't have to give a statement. They can't, it's a joke, absolute joke. You can't, the police chief can't do anything against his own cops. And I know in my case, I had commission members go to the city manager and the police chief and go, what's the story? And basically they said, we don't have to talk to you and we don't have to give you an explanation and we're not going to. And that's, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a young Black man. So the police are out of control and it just gets worse. Interesting study in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton versus Trump, 84% of the police officers went for Trump. So, yet police deaths in 2019 was 48, civilian deaths by police, 624. That is an issue that should resonate with everyone, although until a white person confronts it, or I was in the business as a criminal defense lawyer, they don't understand that that's how the police work. I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's why we're launching this campaign. We've been trying to get, so the campaign is multi-pronged, right? Getting police associations ousted from the House of Labor. They should have no labor affiliation. 2, we want to end what you're describing, which we're calling extra rights for police. So Police Officers' Bill of Rights, all of those kinds of things, qualified immunity need to be undone. And so that's something else that we're doing. And then also, a lot of people are familiar with the clarion call of last summer, which was defund the police, right? Which unfortunately, there's some folks who like to call it a snappy slogan, but it's actually a policy demand. So even before George Floyd was murdered, we had begun working on defunding the police, right? Because in large cities, police actually take up more than 50% of the city's general fund. Imagine what that means, right? In Los Angeles, it's 54% of our city's general fund. But here we are in a place where there are more than 40,000 unhoused people, right? If you can get in front of the challenges, if you can say, we're going to house our folks, we're going to provide quality after school programs for our children, we're going to address mental health conditions with mental health care, right? You actually don't need police very often. And those are the things that we're working towards, and why we say the police associations have got to go. Police associations double down on virtually every issue of corruption and brutality and violence, right? So you see them again protecting the murderer of George Floyd. You see them in California. We're trying to push a bill, a police decertification bill that should be common sense, right? That if police kill somebody, they don't get to continue as police, right? If a doctor killed somebody on the operating table, they wouldn't get to continue, right? If you do these kinds of things, if you're violating the code of your job, you should lose your job. And so we're pushing for a police decertification bill that would take the badges and guns of police who kill our people. And it's police associations that were successful at blocking that the last legislative cycle. And so we're trying to take them down so that we can make sure that we advocate for the people rather than having the police serve as, really purveyors of violence against especially Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor people.
So when you say defund, you're not talking about there would be no police. Call 911. There's no one that'll come if someone's burglarizing your house. That's not what you're talking about.
Well, what we're calling for is common sense. I'll give you an example. Rosario Mack was killed inside Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Mall, which is the Black mall in Los Angeles. He was having a mental health condition. He asked for help. Instead of having a mental health team come, police came in with, quote unquote, in the words of one witness, every gun blazing, which of course then causes an increased spiral. They wind up shooting Rosario Mack dead in the middle of the mall without even evacuating the mall first, right? Endangering the lives of probably thousands of people, right? What we know is that police should have never been a part of that. It should have been a mental health team to deal with a mental health issue.
Right.
When you talk about things like traffic stops, where Daniel Hernandez was just murdered last year in April at a traffic stop by actually the daughter of the head of the police association, right? Why was she on the scene? Why did we need police on the scene for a car accident? We didn't. That's actually Department of Transportation that should be responding. So when we say defund the police, what we want to start with is making sure that the appropriate agency is out to meet that need. We don't need police accompanying DCFS as they're dealing with a question of child custody, right? We don't need police in schools coming in. I don't know how old y'all are, but I suspect you remember a time When, if there was a fight at school, you had somebody at the school, like in my school, it was Mr. Williams, would break up the fight, bring you into the office, and make you write something. And maybe if it was like your fifth fight, then you might get suspended. But you didn't get arrested for having fights, right? That's what kids do. Kids have fights. I have 3 kids. I know that that's what they do, right?
Right.
And so we want to make sure that police are not gobbling up our resources, so we don't have resources for the things that actually bring safety to our communities.
Totally agree. And speaking of the overreaction of police and their us versus them mentality, which I think is an absolute disaster. Did you see what happened in Tacoma? This guy, 24-year-old black man, is delivering newspapers, and one of the guy that actually happened to be the police spokesman, a lieutenant or a sheriff, he sees this guy and decides he's suspicious because he's going house to house early in the morning, and calls it in and says he was threatened. He later admitted he wasn't threatened, but he called it in and said, this guy's threatening to kill me, even though it, he admitted on when the police got that no, he was never threatened. 42 police units responded. 42.
Right.
To a newspaper guy. Astounding. Now, so the problem, there's 2 problems then. How the black people are mistreated by police, and how police generally mistreat everyone anyways. They're terrible, just terrible. And in Coral Gables, you can't be hired if you ever smoked marijuana. But you don't have to take any psychological tests, I know, to know if you're mentally stable or a racist. So policing is a disaster. I don't know what we do about it. But one thought I did have is civil lawsuits. I think it was the Southern Poverty Law Center crushed the KKK by suing them civilly.
That's right.
And I would, so they got this poor paper guy, 24 years old. I think he lives with his mother, had a couple kids, something like that. This guy can't afford a lawyer. He can't hire a lawyer to sue the police. But I'd love to see a nonprofit organization represent, every time you get a case like that, sue.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brad, congratulations for volunteering your law degree and leading this charge. I'm going to make sure to give out all of your personal information. We'll make this happen, I promise. But real quick, when it comes to the defunding the police, I think it should have been called, again, marketing perspective, reallocating funds for the police. Because here in Miami specifically, when people hear defund the police, it's over. It's over because they can't get past that. And their belief is it's a train wreck. There's no more police. What are these people doing? And then the media is controlling really what the narrative that they want to put out. And you see people in the streets marching. And then if you have 5 or 10 that unfortunately are not behaving the way they should, and they are breaking the law, now that's thrown in your face repeatedly, and they're playing on fear. So if we start using different words, reallocating the budget, I think we're going to be able to get a little further. That's just my 2 cents.
I totally hear what you're saying, and it wasn't that bad of a marketing strategy because in cities all across the country, we defunded the police, right? So in Los Angeles, we got our budget defunded, the police budget defunded by $150 million. In the school system, they got it defunded by 35%. In Minneapolis, they've defunded the police. In Oakland, they're defunding the police. In Seattle, they're defunding the police. So it worked, right?
Love it.
Yeah.
How's Chief Moore doing these days?
How's what?
Chief Moore.
We're calling for him to be fired.
Yeah, how can we defund him permanently?
Yeah, so we want everybody to sign the petition at tinyurl.com/fire LAPD Chief Moore. In less than 2 weeks, LAPD has shot 8 people, killing 3. They have, we did it. There was an independent investigation of how he handled the uprisings in Los Angeles last summer. We found that he gave direct orders to shoot protesters with rubber bullets and beat us with batons and pepper spray us. We also know that just last week, he had 400 police officers descend on a small group of demonstrators who were trying to protect an encampment for unhoused folks at Echo Park Lake. His police officers were on audio saying things like, the helicopter was saying things like they wish that they could dump the gasoline on the protesters and they hope they have a match. We know that they circulated that terrible Valentine card with George Floyd's image that said, "You take my breath away." We know that they have been so corrupt that of 4,862 claims of racial bias, they found themselves to be, for all of them, to be unfounded. Not a single incident are they admitting that they engaged in. He just recently got caught lying about the number of traffic stops in South Central Los Angeles. He said that there were 64 and there were 739. His officers got caught stopping Black people and searching Black people at 3 times the rate of everyone else, even though we're less likely to have contraband items with us on our persons or in our cars. And so he's absolutely one of the most corrupt, problematic police chiefs in the country. And then he himself is a killer cop. He pulled the trigger in 2 police shootings. And so it's really important that we get rid of Michael Moore. And so the people are demanding that he be fired.
Do you remember the album that I have right behind me?
Of course I do. Which one? The NWA, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Yes.
30-something years later.
Yeah.
And it's a different commissioner, a different chief, excuse me, but it's the same problem.
Absolutely.
It's insane.
And let me say this, we can win. So we got the previous police chief fired. Charlie Beck was fired by the people, right? He called it a retirement, but we launched into him and said that Charlie Beck had to go. And we got rid of him. We can get rid of Moore too. It won't take us that long. It won't be that hard to get rid of him. But we're calling for the firing of Michael Moore.
And how is the vetting process? Because you just told me that he was involved in, 2 acts that he actually shot himself. How can we make sure he doesn't end up in a position of power? Someone like him, whoever next is going to be.
Well, what we're shown is we cannot let up for a minute. And so, for instance, Charlie Beck, when we got him fired from LAPD, he actually came to Chicago where he became acting chief. Thankfully, we're part of a global movement and we're able to kind of hit him in Chicago, and they finally got rid of him, or actually got rid of him pretty quickly in Chicago. So we can't let up for a minute. If Michael Moore is fired in LA, he will absolutely try to get another position. We have to make sure that we hold him back. And this question that you're pointing to is there has to be, some consequence for the mayor who appoints the chief. So Eric Garcetti, who's the mayor of Los Angeles, is responsible for Michael Moore. And we're telling Eric Garcetti he needs to fire Michael Moore. But also we need to hold Garcetti, who has really huge political ambitions, right? He floated his own name as a presidential candidate this last round, right? That there will be political consequences if he appoints someone who continues to abuse the people of Los Angeles. And he's also reminded that just this December, as he was jockeying for a position in Joe Biden's cabinet, we were watching what he was doing in LA, and we protested in front of his house every single day for 23 days and successfully blocked him from a cabinet appointment. So we have to demonstrate to elected officials that there are political consequences to pay for not doing what the people demand.
So political demand, voting. If you look at voting, black people turned out an average of 60%, which is a little higher, I think, than the national average. For Obama, first time, it was 65%, which is pretty high. Second term, 67%, pretty high, very high. And then for Hillary Clinton versus Trump, back down to 60%. Now, I know that the voter suppression laws, I can't think of anything more un-American. It's just astounding, just beyond astounding and frustrating. But that aside, how do we get black people to vote at a higher rate? Because, you know, I did the calculations.
Right. Real quick, Melina has to jump off in a little bit. She's got to go. So, okay. Melina, could you answer that question briefly before we get you off?
Sure. So I think that when we talk about black people in voting, right, black people continue, and it kind of cycles back to the earlier questions that you had about black people in this country, right, and our commitment to democracy, our commitment to justice, that there is an undue burden placed on the backs of black people, that we do vote at rates that are higher than our population share, right? That black women in particular are the most consistent, constant, and stable group of voters of any group in this country, right? Black women will vote for presidential elections and water board elections. We'll vote for any election that comes up. We're not missing it, right? So I think it's really important that we not say, how can you do more? How can black people do more, right? And we started hearing this around, again, the Clinton, when Hillary Clinton ran. Well, really the question is, how can everybody else do more? We're already taking on more than our share. How can everybody else do more, right? So when we talk about Donald Trump becoming, staking claim to the White House, it was white people. That was their fault, right? White people are the only group that voted for Donald Trump in a majority. And so really the question needs to become, how do we shift white voters, especially the white voters who think that, candidates like a Donald Trump are in their interest when they're absolutely not, right? They get some semblance of, kind of being at the top of the racial hierarchy. But when you talk about things like class, white folks were hurting under Trump too, right? White folks are not winning when you usher in elected officials that enable police brutality or enable corporate control of this country. And so I think the question really needs to be about, how can everybody else flank and support and continue to push what it is black people are already doing?
Well, from our end, we're going to push extremely hard. I'm going to try to get on guests like yourself that are making an impact. And more importantly, you're teaching others how to be able to work off your momentum and your knowledge, really. And so we truly appreciate you being on the show. Brad is one of the good ones. He's a good white guy. I've been repping him for like 25 years. So he's on the right side of history. And we're going to see what we can do from a legal standpoint to really use his background and his knowledge to how we can make an impact and a difference. And if I could ask you for one little favor, sure. I've been impacted by you and Killer Mike. And I've been stalking Killer Mike. He's not getting back to me. Can you send him out at some point a text for me and let him know that I wanted a good one?
I love Killer Mike, but he's also hard to get in touch with. So,
All right.
So I'll try.
I'm going to stock them for the both of us. Don't worry about it. I got it. Melina,
all right. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated the conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Have a great one.
Okay, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.